didn't want to study people. I wanted to relate with people. How strange that I would then choose to become a doctor, right? Rather than a.
Welcome to Back to the Future podcast. My name is Victor Sadia, and I talk with brilliant minds and hearts of people who want to uproot and transform the current health and wellness paradigm. Dr. Lisa Lichtig is a family physician, midwife, and herbalist with over 30 years of experience, also serving as a traditional healer and ceremonial leader. After a rigorous and long apprenticeship under the guidance of elders, she was initiated as a marakame in the Huichol healing tradition. She specializes in functional medicine, chronic illness healing, while also being a firekeeper for Sacred Fire, a non-for-profit community service organization. In this episode, we talk about Lisa's journey as an archaeologist and anthropologist and the reasons and feelings that led her to become a doctor. We discuss the need to go outside the walls of medical institutions to strengthen what medicine is and the importance of building relationships with patients and communities, including indigenous peoples. She reflects on the evolving practices in medical education, highlighting the need for a collaboration, permission, and emotional connection in scientific inquiry. Lisa shares insights from her career as a traditional healer and ceremonial leader and her commitment to community-oriented care. We also explore the intersection of science and spirit, advocating for a more relational approach to healthcare that honors the interconnectedness of all beings. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Today we have Dr. Lisa Lichtig. Lisa, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, muchas gracias, Victor. Thank you so much for inviting me. And thank you to all of the viewers or the listeners who are gathered here as well.
You know, I've probably read your bio, the one you have on your website, 5-6 times now. And I always stop at this small paragraph, and I'm going to quote it because I want to open the conversation with this point in your life. You say, "It became clear that rather than writing a PhD dissertation on indigenous healing systems or digging up ancestors' bones, my calling was to serve living people as a physician." Mm-hmm. Take me to that point when I don't know, your being said that your calling was to be a physician rather than just a researcher or an anthropologist.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Victor. And thank you for reading my bio. You've probably read it more than most people have, but that was a turning point for me because I'd been all my life as a child, I was interested in science and I was interested in bugs and plants and things that were growing. And when I went to college, so I was studying anthropology, and in particular, I was studying archaeology. And I actually dug up the bones of the Hopewell Indians, those ancestors. I dug up their bones, and at the time, I didn't know what I was doing. And one of my teachers now says, that's I'm making reparations by all the work that I'm doing now. I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but it wasn't like I felt guilty. But then after doing a lot of archaeology and paleontology, where I was actually identifying diseases and illnesses in the cremated remains and trying to learn and bring a scientific rigor to an understanding of illness, then I started studying cultural anthropology. And I started becoming more aware of different indigenous peoples and their healing systems. But I felt that it was all very mental. Not that studying and the intellect is bad. We need the intellect. We need mental endeavors. But it was almost as if now I have words for it. But at the time, all I felt that it felt very transactional rather than relational. And I was looking at rather than being with. And that was an awareness for me. And I said, I don't want to look at, I want to be with.
That's a profound thing, and I love that you say I didn't have the words then to say this, because that's in a sense being with, the situation, not looking at the situation, but just being immersed in it. And then later, years later, you came up with the words to understand what was happening to you at that being with moment. No, right? Um, Before we jump into that, being with, and why physician was a calling of being with, let's talk about archaeology a bit. Like, if let's say this, if you would go back to that Lisa at that age with this consciousness of being with, how do you think that your work and your approach to the bones of those beings that were being unearthed would change in terms of your approach to that science of paleontology and archaeology?
I'm not sure if I entirely understand the question, but I'll just kind of go with it and then you can redirect me. Uh, I would say that at the time, I actually felt that I was being with,
Mm-hmm.
but I wasn't sure if the people around me were being with. And it was something that bothered me a little bit. Um, and there was, I mean, I was young, right? I was in my 20s, but I knew that there was something profound that we were doing, and I wanted to do the best job that I could, but I knew that there was something profound, but I couldn't really talk about it with anybody. And after our work, we'd go get some beers and smoke some cigarettes, and we'd shoot the shit, and there wasn't much of a consideration for what we were doing because the work was really hard. And in fact, I think one of the telling points was when one of our professors, who is a very high in academia, she wanted to have such a profound discovery that she planted some obsidian in the archaeology site and sort of played a trick on us. And so even then, I felt that I was a little bit of a stranger in a strange land. So if I would, now the question that you're asking is, from what I know now in terms of being with, how might I approach archaeology? I think that's a little bit of your question.
Yeah.
Well, I had a great opportunity to, a couple weeks ago, to meet a young woman who is studying archaeology right now. She's the girlfriend of a dear young man who I watched him grow up since he was little. And I just met her for the first time, and she was so excited to talk with me. And I was excited to speak with her because I hadn't spoken about this part of my life in years. And we were talking about the archaeology and how to approach it differently, or how she was approaching it. And she said that her professors now are imparting to them the importance of building a relationship with the indigenous peoples whose lands that they are seeking to maybe unearth, and to get permission from the tribes, from the people, and to have more of a collaboration in terms of their inquiry. That was not happening when we were doing this work. We were never asking permission. We were looking at rather than being with. Now, I'm not sure how much that is actually happening, but she had an approach, she had an awareness, and her professors did too. So I was really pleased to see that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I get you. And in a sense, I don't know, my words to describe this would be that sometimes doing science, either archaeology or chemistry or social sciences, playing the game of, researching, publishing, earning your rank in the pantheon of science, um, in a sense robs the researcher from the magic and the awe and just the sheer nakedness of being in front of such beauty and magnificence. Because you need to put it into words, into a paper, something that gets published and then gets talked in the media, as if the machinery of science robs the magic of the things that are being studied themselves. Does these words make sense?
They make a lot of sense to me, Victor. And some of it is that there is, I mean, there isn't, well, perhaps there's emotion that's part of it. I was going to say it seems like it's devoid of emotion, but I think science and spirit are getting closer and closer together. But we don't pause and take time to be in relationship with the place that is being studied or looked at or even related with. We don't take time to consider the relationship, and a relationship happens through what we're feeling.
Yeah.
And what the other's feeling, and finding our place of connection. So when we get too much, it's almost like you could say it's a bit of the mind leading the heart rather than the heart leading the mind.
Mm-hmm. And tell me what happened when you got into medical school. What of those being with dreams did happen or didn't happen in medical school? Another science that has its own things.
Well, it's one of the stories I want to share with you is when it was my application to medical school. So my application to medical school was not your typical application. I wrote a letter to my unborn children. That was my application to medical school. And many years later, I sent it to a friend or my father, and they sent it back to me. It's interesting that this podcast is Back to the Future. So you are asking us about our histories to see where I think I'm tracking you a little bit, Victor,
Yeah.
and I think it's wonderful. It's like, what made us? How did we get here?
Mm.
And so there was something about applying to medical school that I had to take into consideration this endeavor as if I was speaking to my unborn children. And so my entree into medical school, it was always based upon how can I be of service and how can I get to know myself and others and those that aren't even born yet. And so, a lot of the elders speak about, the next generations. Well, at least in my 20s, I was thinking about just the next generation, not the 7 generations. I hadn't even had that view or perspective yet. So I brought that to me. And I guess when those who were accepting applications, I guess they saw something because I, was accepted to a very high-ranking medical school, and I was able to do some things in a different way when I was there.
What do you think, apart from being an archaeologist and thinking in geological time rather than just Facebook time, prompted you to feel that talking to your unborn children was something that had to do with medicine?
That's a good question. You stopped me there. So I'm going to reflect on that. Well, these are the words I have now for that. Something compelled me, and it wasn't. So what I feel, the words I have today for what compelled me was that I don't feel like I ever saw, it's the paradox of, well, when I was in high school, reading I and Thou, Martin Buber's I and Thou, had a really profound impact on me. That we have to get to know ourselves, but we are so much more than ourself. So how do we honor ourselves and at the same time recognize that we are impermanent in these bodies and that our spirit lives on? but it's not even our individual spirit. And that we are connected. And so if I was, whether I was dishonoring in some way the ancestors by digging them up, right? Unbeknownst to me, I was still connecting with the relationship of human beings before me, and writing to my unborn children was relating to those who come after me. And somehow that helps to see that I and the people that I'm serving are more than their physical illness. And I appreciate you asking this question, Victor, because the situations or the relationships that I had with patients or with my colleagues or with there was this one guy, Glenn Blount, I think his name was. He was the custodian at the VA hospital when I was in pregnant intern. He gave me so much inspiration and so much courage, and we became friends. Because he'd be sweeping the halls at night, and he was interested in meditation. That's how I first got interested in meditation, was from the custodian at the VA hospital, and he would paint pictures. And so I guess I began to see people in my present life as important and of value, and who they were connected with, their families and their kin, was of great value and interest to me. So that's, I'd say, how how I brought that, or how that influenced seeing myself as a doctor
Yeah.
in medicine. Thank you for asking that.
Yeah, thank you. I think that, you know, many people go into medical school just copying a very simplistic model of, you know, seeing your parent heal people, or just do rounds in a hospital, or just walk around with a white coat, or but it does matter, um, the things that you want to find in medicine that are not part of the curricula. You know, like if a philosopher goes into medicine, an artist goes into medicine, an archaeologist goes into medicine, even before we have all that language to name why we choose medicine, um, that intuition, that something that you said, something made me perceived in that way. And then I decided to go into medical school, one of the harshest and most difficult uh, careers to choose.
Oh, I'm getting I appreciate the way you are reflecting to me, because it's about people. I went, anthropology is the study of people. I didn't want to study people. I wanted to relate with people. How strange that I would then choose to become a doctor, right? Rather than a poet or an artist, or, there's a lot of ways we can relate with people, but there's something about, mm, perhaps it has something to do with, we're vulnerable. And when we're either ill, we're not at our best, we're having a challenge. And maybe that's the time when people search their soul and they ask some important questions. So I guess I was asking similar questions, but and that seemed like a natural avenue
Yeah.
to be with people.
And you know, you went into medicine with a non-traditional, conventional application, and you practice as a physician also from a non-conventional, traditional approach. You didn't feel the mold, and you adjusted the mold um, to your own insights, in a sense, right?
Yeah.
So tell me about that. What did you find in medicine, the conventional career that you took in med school, that you liked, and what are the things that you think um, prompted you to try and legitimize other ways of being a physician, which definitely
Yeah.
you are that.
Yeah. Well, one of the things because as you said, there's a lot of conventional medicine that I appreciated, and even the study of it I appreciated. Um, and in particular, I loved anatomy. And I almost thought about becoming a surgeon, working with my hands and just fascination with the body. And I was really good at it, but I realized that I would have to sacrifice a lot and sacrifice family, though there's plenty of women and great surgeons who are also mothers. Um, and in particular, when I was in anatomy and physiology, some of the thing I was in awe. This is going back into the bones, right? When I was in my anatomy class and we were, examining, they call them cadavers. They were the body, they were the home, the sacred home to a spirit, to a human being, right? And, there's such a diverse group of people, and some people were really callous because it's very confronting to do that work, but we didn't really talk about it. But my group who worked, for I think it was at least 6 months with this one individual, we wanted to know about this person, and we we really considered who this person was. And so when I was in my clinicals and I was scrubbed up surgically, I would always consider, it wasn't just the draped person and you're holding retractors for 8 hours, right? And you're hungry and your feet hurt and your knees hurt and you're about to pass out. And I would, find myself kind of leaning my elbow on, this like soft but firm thigh. And I realized, oh my gosh, there's a human being here. And so I always danced between, because I was smart and I was interested in learning. I liked the intellectual endeavor, but I also always felt the preciousness of the human beings that I was with. So that uh, that led me to, there was frustrations in medical school because we were learning, and maybe if you have any listeners out there who are even considering going into medicine, a lot of people are turned off by it nowadays, but I say go for it. We need more, humane artists. We need more artist doctors. That's what I always say. I'm an artist doctor. And when we were learning, we were learning within the confines of this university, and we didn't always get out beyond the walls of the edifice. And so a lot of my education, I had many opportunities, or I created opportunities, or I found doorways to walk through to get outside of just the classroom. So I valued the classroom, but I wanted to see what life was about. And some of that is related to, I grew up in the suburbs of Detroit. But when I was 15, I went out west for the first time, and I saw mountains and I saw rivers, and I went spelunking in caves, and I saw this amazing world that we're a part of. And so I guess I had an adventurous spirit. But then our education, I valued it, but I knew that there was more. So I never really was anti-education. I just knew that there was more and that there was a foundation. And so I wanted to reach outside of the walls of the institution. And so one of the things that I did is as a student, I created a internship, a summer program for medical students. And I was one of them. And I led us on a prison medicine internship for the summer. And so we went into jails and women's prisons and high maximum security prisons in Detroit and Chicago. And so, because I felt like it was important for students to see cultures, maybe this was the anthropologist in me, to see cultures beyond what we were seeing just in the hospital. But I didn't think that we needed to travel outside of the United States to do that. There was so many cultures and so many people there's such diversity. And so I brought that into the educational experience for students, and it was profound for
Wow.
them and for me.
And you also went a year to Nigeria, right, in West Africa, before your residency. Yeah, so
Yes.
that's another world that you open to. What was Nigeria? Um, you told me when we first met, you told me in Nigeria I learned about friendship, and that phrase stuck. It's
Yeah.
there. Um, yeah, tell me about that world that was also part of your medical training in a sense.
Well, so I did the prison work before I went to Nigeria. And I took a year between my third and fourth year of medical school, and I was part of a group of I a fellowship program to spend a year learning about international health and community-oriented primary care, because I was very interested in community even as a medical student. And I worked with migrant farm workers in the Skagit Valley in the state of Washington as well, which was another experience of getting outside of the clinic and into the migrant farm camps and getting to know people and what were their needs, rather than just like peddling birth control. It was supposedly under the auspices of teaching them about family planning, but it was really getting to know what did they need. So I brought those two experiences working in rural Washington and in the inner city, in the prisons, and also working in the inner city of Detroit. So with those three experiences, then I went to Nigeria. But at that point, I felt like I, you'd say, in some ways, when mentors like see this capacity to be a leader, then there's a grooming that happens. And so I felt like I was being groomed for leadership in non-governmental organizations, right? To make change, to be of service in a very organized way. And I was excited about those possibilities. When I went to Nigeria, uh, actually, Victor, interesting. After our conversation that we had about a month ago, my my friend from college, one of my best friends from college, about a week ago, just sent me the letters that I wrote to him from Nigeria. And I hadn't remembered too many of the stories except for this piece about friendship. And at the time, that was in 1988. And I wrote by hand, and I went to the local Xerox copy place, and they waited 3 weeks, 4 weeks to get the letters. And it was very different time. But I wrote a lot then, and I was rereading one of the letters because I was asking myself the same question. What was it about friendship? I can tell you about that, but just the prelude is that my first day, when we were driving this group of students, we dropped three of them off in one of the main city hospitals in Ibadan, Nigeria. And there was a woman standing on the balcony, and she was sobbing. because she had just lost her daughter. And I don't know if I'd actually seen people sobbing. It was like the humanity. I saw this humanity on my very first day there. I saw this humanity. And then even with the medical students, they were in a very conventional, even more conventional than my university. And they didn't get outside the walls of the classroom very much. But this one group of students, they were getting outside of the classroom, and they had started going to a village, and building relationships with the people in the village, because the people would come to the hospital, but a lot of people didn't come to the hospital because when they got to the hospital, they had to pay for their own food, their own IV fluids, their own Band-Aids, and a lot of them couldn't afford it. So at the time, I was learning about guinea worm, or I became part of a project for guinea worm eradication. And I don't want to take up this time to explain about guinea worm, but it's an amazing, it's all related to water and access to water and the cycles of life and the cycles of a guinea worm, and how human beings and the relationship with water and cycles of life. But I was part of a national project to eradicate guinea worm. And what we found with this group of students is, even though we were working on the national level with this project, we found that the people in the villages were not really engaging with the preventive health measures that were being taught, because nobody was going out to the village and building a relationship with them. And so it was hard for them to think about filtering their water, because filtering their water would prevent guinea worm 9 months from the time they drank the water. They were having incredible difficulties. Just they had sores and ulcers and abscesses, and they couldn't even walk, some of the people. So they were suffering. They had an immediate need. And so working with the students, we became friends with the students. And through this friendship with the students, we then developed a friendship with one of the local villages. And then they began, through trust and building a relationship, they began to trust us, and we found ways to communicate and explain and laugh and, talk about pregnancy and of these guinea worms and how they were laying eggs and in their water. And they began to take a different approach because we combined acute care with prevention. But it wasn't just acute care and prevention. It was really about building a relationship. And so we became friends with the students. There were a lot of interestingly, there were other students who were in other posts both in Ghana and Nigeria, and they were overwhelmed and having a really hard time culturally. And my two mates, we recognized that friendship, becoming friends with the people in the little neighborhood that we lived in, becoming friends with the Wycliffe Bible translators who were proselytizing and were missionaries. It was becoming friends with everybody, and becoming not only friends with the people, but becoming friends with the sun and the land and the wind. And
Yeah. Wow, that's the bond is what heals, and then the information can flow, and I know this, that. Let's work together. Um, I would love to hear like a definition of community medicine. What I say when I say community medicine, what do you think about? And in a sense, I think that in the West, with this excess of individualism and an individualistic approach to healing, um, I'm already jumping into part of my answer, at least. But but you know, in a sense, it feels like in the West we say, yeah, bring the community in. Your relationships are so important for your health. Like if it's like if it's an add-on, an extra, like having a more comfortable pillow to sleep at night, you know, instead of just the basis of who we are. Um, what's community medicine for you?
Right, I studied this, right? I was groomed to, I could give you, right, the academic answer. I haven't been asked this question in, gosh, Victor, 30, 35 years. Community medicine. I guess you have to first start with saying, what is community? Right? And that's evolved for me over time. And it starts with a recognition that you maybe have heard the teachings about the sacred hoop.
No.
Pat McCabe, she who stands shining, is a, a wise elder, and she teaches about the sacred hoop. And so my definition of community medicine is really expanded from over the past 35 years. Community is, you can talk about this as a human family, but she talks about the hoop, the sacred hoop, that the legitimacy of every being, that we are in relationship with every being, plants, animals, the waters, the mountains, the sun, the sky, the humans, the ones who came before us, and the ones that are going to come after us. We're part of a whole community. We talk about it as like an ecosystem. Right now, that's a good scientific term, but we're part of, and so I'd say community or community medicine is when this might feel like a tall order or impossible to achieve, but to live from a place of regard and taking care of all of our kin. I'm not going to do it on my own, but to be a part of a perspective and living from a place that we care for others, everyone. Everyone is legitimate because we're here. Everything, the human and the non-human. So medicine, you might say community medicine, is caring for.
Yeah. I'm reading a lot about the metabolic theory of cancer and really defining cancer as a disease of isolation, of not understanding these ties that pre-live, the knotting of the partners precede the partners themselves. We're not individual, and then we go into a social contract and say, okay, I give you this, you give me that. The partnership between us is what gives us the possibility of calling us individuals. And what I want to get to is that if we characterize the cancer cell or the cancer or a cancerous group of people who basically isolate from their kin and take up on nutrients and take up on space until the place where we all live dies. I want to make this connection because I think that there's this mirroring of the biological behavior of the cancerous cell in a body and the cancerous behavior of us as as humans in this planet, not only with other species on the natural world, but also amongst us, you know? So I don't know if this mirrors something for you.
Well, it's an interesting perspective that you're bringing about cancer as a way of isolating from our connection. So maybe we can stitch some things together, because the other piece about, right, community is there's an interconnection, and we have a consideration, right? There's exchange. So with cancer, how I've seen cancer, um, having worked with, having worked with people, having studied it some, having had my own experience with my husband, navigating and surviving stage 4 cancer, and many who haven't, caring for dear beloved ones who have left, um, is that it has to do with, we talk about cancer as growth out of control. Or we might say some great imbalance. So this great imbalance. And as I began to study the metabolic approach to cancer 4 years ago, when my beloved was faced with navigating cancer, we began to see that cancer, it has its own operating system. So, how do we, I guess how do I welcome cancer? There's a lot of people that are afraid to say the C word, right? It's very daunting. Cancer is equated with death. And so I began talking more about cancer and having a relationship with it. Others talk about cancer as a messenger as well. What's out of balance? And so cancer is growth out of control, something out of balance. It has its own operating system that that's important for us to understand and get to know. And it's easy to become afraid of that because cancer plays by different rules.
Yeah.
Right? But it's here. And on a bigger scale, so I want to better understand what you mean in terms of the isolation. If we could say growth out of control or its own operating system, but I would also say, but it's also here as a messenger. So in that sense, right, it's a teacher. People who have cancer don't like to hear that. I mean,
Yeah. Let
right?
me just add one thing. There's an interesting book by Jason Fung. It's called The Cancer Code, and he equates the cancer cell as the unicellular organisms that roam the earth for thousands of years before we enter into multicellular life, which necessitates this interchange of to create this symbiosis. We are a human body. How many interactions, symbiotic interactions, has every second, with bacteria and with fungi, things. And it's interesting how he compares this cancerous cell as basically like recalling this genetic instruction manual that we have in our cells, in our DNA, that when we're exposed to damage that doesn't kill us, our main way of protecting is basically stopping to care about others and just going into ourselves and just behave as unicellular beings struggling for their own survival, most of the time at the cost of the others.
I see what you're saying. I've heard of that book. I've heard of his book, The Cancer Code, and I haven't, but I'm interested in reading it now. so what you're speaking to is that there's when we become afraid, you could say afraid, if we're our mind dominated, right? I like to think about we as human beings, we're different than the other beings. We're part, but we're also different. And part of that is because we have a mind that has the capacity to self-reflect. We can see that we see. And, you know, the squirrels and the rabbits and the deer and the butterflies and the eagles, they're just, and the plants, they're doing their thing. They live in awareness, right? From this, they're not concerned. We're the only being that lives with concern. And that's because we have this mind. So we popped out but we're still a part. We're still an animal, a certain type of animal. And so we have this mind, and our mind, if I, is gives us this gift to build things. We don't have fur, so we can't keep ourselves warm. We have a lot of disadvantages as an animal. So our mind helps us to innovate and work with the materials of the world around us, right? To protect ourselves, to give us shelter, to cook food. And so the mind is really helpful in that way. But the mind also carries a lot of worry because we see that we see. And so we have fears, and we have fear of our own inadequacies and the fear of others, the fear of our nature and growing old and dying and disease. And then we have fear of what's going to happen next. This great uncertainty and unknown. And so our fear, and when that gets amplified, that can create a lot of isolation. And how I'm trying to stitch it with what you're saying, see if you're following me, is that isolation, the mind, I don't want to get rid of the mind. We can't get rid of the mind. People have tried, enlightened beings. I'm not sure that they've gotten rid of the mind. They've developed a relationship with the mind,
Yeah.
And so, but our mind, when it keeps getting amped, we get disconnected from our heart, and that isolation, maybe I'm bringing maybe more of a philosophical or spiritual, psychological, shamanic maybe view of the scientific piece of this unicellular piece, that this isolation develops. And so
Yeah.
we go back to this unicellular, isolated, not connected place.
Yeah. I think that's it. In a sense that cancer can be a messenger to the mind that tries to explain cancer, um, by not labeling as a foreign invader, as a genetic mutation that was, I don't know, dictated by the evil gods that want to punish us, but rather that we are cancer. And as a civilization, we have developed this system, this process, this operational, this, as you call it, its own operation system, and not treated as a foreign invader. And when we see how alike
Yes.
we can be to cancer, is that there's a big message, I think, there to
Oh my
be
gosh.
heard.
That you're speaking about, we get bound up, right? Rather than a part of, we get bound up,
Yeah.
right? The cancer is the response to being bound up. Is that
Yeah. Yeah.
similar to?
And in a sense, the response is not it's not taking us anywhere, because being bounded up diminishes our chances of survival. And being bounded up and being just concerned with this survival at all costs ends up eating the food that sustains the whole ecosystem, the soil and the people, and that can also be tracked, obviously, how a tumor ends up killing its host and then
Yeah,
commit
and how
suicide.
it feeds, it feeds on glucose. Many
Yeah.
cancers feed on glucose, right? It starts to feed on yeah, it continues to feed on
Yeah.
us.
Yeah, when you were describing the sacred hoop, you round your fingers in a circle,
Yeah.
and I think that's beautiful. Now, I've been thinking a lot about your experience with the sacred fire keepers. You are a sacred fire keeper,
Yeah.
and sitting around a fire in a circle and building a fire pit in a circle is so it doesn't it's so symbolic of basically, I think, all the reality. But let's say we've been keeping fires for ages. How was it for you, and what does it mean to be a sacred fire keeper in this day and age?
Mm. Well, thank you for that question. Because in this day and age, right, it's back to the future, right? Going back to help us with our future. What it means to be a fire keeper, a keeper of the sacred fire, um, is it is such an honor. And I learn every day, and I learn every fire I light, and I'm humbled all the time. And I see a longing in people. What I see is people coming together from, I feel like it's the medicine. It's medicine. Bringing people together around the fire and working in the ways that our ancestors did. Because the fire, the spirit of fire, fire is a spirit, and it's a humanity helping spirit. It's one of the oldest forms of human support and connection, if not the oldest form of human support and connection. All the religions, all the traditions have a relationship with fire. So while I'm part of a kind of a social spiritual movement called Sacred Fire, it's not, we light the fire for all people,
Yeah.
from all traditions and all walks of life. To hold a neutral place reminds me of when I was in Nigeria and making friendship. So, but the fire in particular, as a spiritual presence in our lives. In the old days, our ancestors, we've always had a spiritual relationship with fire, and our ancestors knew that. So that's why they would come around the fire. They would seek counsel. They would tell stories. They would pass on the traditions and the ways. They would share the difficulties of life. They would cook their food. And nowadays, fire has become a utility. Like the lights are a form of fire, or to cook our food or to keep us warm. But back in the day, that's people would come for healing and help and transformation, to lighten their load and the burdens of their day. And somehow fire, so nowadays I have been trained and initiated to keep the fire and to light the fire and to work with people around the fire in a particular way that helps them to relate with not just the social fire, which is really important, but a sacred fire, so that people can come and they can build a relationship, a friendship with the fire as a spirit, as a sacred expression that helps us. And the interesting thing, when we work with fire, here's the sacred hoop, but we also work with the directions. So here's the fire, but we also make offerings to the fire. And as we make offerings to the fire, we are honoring the directions, the north and the south and the east and the west, and the qualities, because we're part of a world we don't know our place anymore. And suddenly, if we have a sense of direction this way and this way, that's what helps us to build the circle or create the circle, is having the directions and up and down. So it's this, but it's also this.
I
And
love this.
so people can come together and I see them begin to relax, and they see themselves in others. And then others see themselves in others and in the fire. And suddenly the mind starts to quiet down. And when we work with fire in this way, we find a way to navigate our challenges and our difficulties. And we can face life more courageously. So it's actually medicine, community medicine. It's real. You say, what is community medicine? Coming together around a fire is a form of community medicine.
Yeah. Yeah, and those of us who have, I think I would love that everyone at least once in their lives have this experience around the fire, even if it's a celebratory fire for, I don't know, New Year's. But you know, it's something that you feel when you are there, you know. And I know there's a lot of traditions and all of rituals, but it's so embedded in in our I don't know, narrative, psyche, DNA, everything, you know, resonates with that sacred place that has given us life throughout millennia and that has gotten us here. And I think that's something that it's reminded when we're there, regardless of a specific ritual to be taking place. So yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Fire, humans have a particular relationship with fire that is different than all other animals.
Mhm.
And so what you're saying is in our DNA. It's natural. So it's natural for it helps us to see our common kinship,
Mhm.
because
That's it.
yeah.
That's it. Well, Lisa, you know, these conversations are just beginning. I love that we like took the time to listen and to feel and to be present. And I really appreciate this space you have offered us, me,
Mm.
and yourself. And I thank you. I thank you for this beautiful conversation. I thank you for your practice. I thank you for your your courage of building upon, you know, like the material world and science and studying and practicing and helping people and raising children, and at the same time having the courage to not miss those moments of magic that happen every single second. And yeah, I appreciate you and I thank you so much.
Oh, Victor, I thank you so much for the way in which you hold the space and the invitation to be present and to explore and to discover together. That's how we make fire too. And can I read you a poem?
Please.
Yeah. This is an ancient poem. I don't know who the author is, but I think it comes from the 15th century. And it says, because if it's called Grandfather Prayer. It goes like this. One day I said to Grandfather Fire, you, my beloved spirit of fire, are the potter, and I am the clay. Mold my life however you want. Make me however you want. Make me into a new being. Grandfather said, I will transform you, but in the process, I will make you cry, because I will pass you through my fire. I want a smile when everything goes wrong. I want a praise instead of your complaint. I want your confidence in the storm. And I want you to learn to forgive others. So gratitude and forgiveness. Every morning I wake up and I offer gratitude. I make prayers of gratitude, and I go to bed and I make prayers of gratitude. And sometimes I forget, and I don't do it every day. And I also forgive others, and I forgive myself. And sometimes I forget. But even when I forget, something reminds me and I do it again. So I just really want to thank you for what you're offering to so many people. You are a bright and important light in our world.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for those beautiful words that come from the past, but also come from the future.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're planting seeds. Good night.
Bye.